actually look at all of the things that create risk for the mission, and MMOD is one of those items. And so we have, MMOD predictions for the environments that we're flying in, the orbits we're flying in, and those feed into that tool, and that's how we determine where that risk falls in that regime. We designed the spacecraft to try and be tolerant to MMOD strikes by putting like I said, a lot of margin into our TPS materials and flying in certain ways to keep the MMOD away from where we don't want it to be. So not a lot we can do with what's out there, but we try and characterize it and analyze to it so we understand what we're accepting.
Okay, we can go to you, and then we'll take another question from the phone.
Hi, Michael Atkinson, Houston Public Media. I have a question for Rick. I want to ask how reentry for this mission looks different than it did for Artemis I, and also recent missions over the last couple of decades, how this is specifically different. And then if I could also get a quick confirmation to tonight's press conference. I tried to figure out if this is the first press conference from deep space before, or at least out of Earth orbit, and couldn't figure that out 100%. So if anyone has that confirmation.
Well, on that one, we'll have to go back and look what they did during Apollo. So we'll get back to you.
As far as the changes on entry between Artemis I and Artemis II, the most significant difference is the range from entry interface to splashdown. We've talked a number of times about how we've shortened the entry range. We're down around 2,000 miles for this mission, and that's a function of the certification of the heat shield. Changes on entry between Artemis I and Artemis II. The most significant
and we did just actually get a quick follow-up that there were in-flight opportunities with the crew during Apollo. Okay, we'll go to the phone. We'll get a question from Micah Maidenberg with the Wall Street Journal.
Hi, thanks, Rachel. Just a couple of things for Rick. Rick, how long does the period of max velocity that you mentioned last? And can you talk about sort of the expectations for crew during reentry? Are they expected to be silent, make verbal observations about what's going on? Thanks. Just a couple of things for Rick.
Yeah, the period of max velocity shouldn't last long. We're continuing to speed up as we speak. We're getting closer and closer to Earth, and our velocity is increasing, and it'll peak out right around entry interface. As for what's going on in the cockpit, it'll be very similar to when you're on board a aircraft flying commercial. The pilots are nothing but professional because they're focused on the task at hand, and so I expect the cockpit to be silent as Reed and Victor monitor the spacecraft performance. If all goes nominal, they will not need to take any actions, but they have been trained working with my team of flight controllers to respond in the event that we are faced with an off-nominal scenario.
Our next question is from Joseph Howlett with Scientific American.
If all goes nominal, they will not need to
Hi.
take any action.
From the mission thus far, I'm curious if there's any lessons you've learned that have informed the plan for reentry. Are there any new risks or contingencies that you're thinking about based on what you've learned so far on board?
This question is from Joseph Howlett with Scientific American.
As far as what we've learned throughout the mission that has changed how we've done entry, we really have had a really well-functioning spacecraft. My team is going to take the console tomorrow, and we're going to have a briefing with the flight crew in preparation for entry, and really we don't have any major things. Debbie's got the water valve testing that they talked about, but again, we're going to jettison the service module. The crew module propulsion system is nominal. We're going to activate that tomorrow and see how it's functioning. And so we're planning a nominal entry with procedures just as we had developed them pre-flight.
Joey.
Thanks, Joey Rilla, Reuters. What's the temperature going to be inside the cabin at peak heating or peak velocity? And for any of the little tiny problems that have popped up in this mission, like the toilet and that weird smell that the crew was experiencing, is there anything you have to do with those before re-entry, or is there any problems that may pose during re-entry? Thanks.
I would say from a hardware standpoint, nothing we're doing on re-entry. We have not had any reports of and so we'll get more into that in the crew module when it gets back. Things like the wastewater venting, we have some new work planned on the system. So we're modifying some things on the ground as soon as it gets here to get some data back very quickly, but nothing that we're changing in the mission profile relative to those items.
The crew will be suited with their visors down in a pressurized suit so that they're going to get cool air, and so regardless of the cabin temperature, they'll remain cool and comfortable in their suits.
For the Times of London. I wondered if Lily could just tell us, are there any other recovery or rescue assets in the area? The expectation that the capsule is just going to plop right in front of the vessel. I was just wondering if there's other stuff in the area in case it doesn't. And also, could anybody just talk us through how you, what's going to happen with the astronauts after they come back here? Has there been conversation about what their wishes are in capsules, just about what their wishes are in terms of public appearance and so on? Thank you. And also, could anybody just talk us through...
Okay, this is Lily. I'll answer the first one. Yes, we still are working with the military to ensure that if there is an off-nominal event, that we have rescue forces ready to go to the site of the off-nominal landing. And so we have C-17s with PJs that are stationed at Joint Base Charleston, ready to deploy if needed. And then we have a C-17 with PJs and also all of the hardware that's needed to rescue the crew at Joint Base Pearl Harbor, ready to go at entry. So we're pretty much covered if there is an off-nominal event and they do not land where the ship is. Now, if they land, a short distance from the ship, obviously we will start heading towards the splashdown site. And I'll let somebody else take the second question.
Yes, we do hope to have an opportunity to hear directly from the crew once they return to Earth several days after their return. Okay, let's come down to the front row here.
Start heading towards the splashdown site. And I'll let somebody else take the second question.
Zachary Albert with the Launchpad. Can you take us through the timeline of getting the experiments and science out of Orion? I know coming home from the ISS, there's some that we rapidly get back off the vessel. Is there any plans with that with Orion, or is it going to more just ship back with it when it comes back to Florida?
It's a combination. There's early desto bags that come out right away. They get shipped back on aircraft. Some of the data storage that's got some of the imagery and other technical data will actually be downloading those cards onto computers, making copies there in San Diego. So it's a combination depending on the criticality, and then the vehicle itself comes back, with the rest of the equipment.
TJ.
TJ Mascara with the Epoch Times. Thanks so much. For Lakeisha, sorry if I missed it earlier. I know we were talking about radiation data. Have you all been able to gather, have any of that radiation data downlinked yet? And have you guys been able to take a look at it? Or is that all going to be after?
So I think I was referring to the Avatar data, and that data will obviously be brought off of the ship once it's returned.
Okay, we'll take one from the phone. This from Manuel Mazzanetti with Exploración Espacial.
Or is that all going to be after?
Thank you so much. Manuel Mazzanetti with Exploración Espacial. A question maybe for Rick. This is not regarding entry, but the simulation that the crew performed with the oxygen. I would like to know if they provided some feedback after this exercise. I understand that they were doing in different speeds, how they felt about it, and if you received some feedback from this test. Thank you.
Manuel, we have not, we're not hearing you quite clearly. Can you try again, please?
Yes, I apologize. Manuel Mazzanetti with Exploración Espacial. I was asking Rick if he can provide, if the astronauts gave some feedback regarding the test with the oxygen on board the capsule a few days ago. We were doing at different speeds, and I wonder if the crew provided some feedback of improving the process, or if they felt okay.
Eu acho que caiu na sacola dela do
Not particularly aware of any specific feedback that we've gotten yet from the oxygens from putting them on before, from putting them on earlier in the mission.
Mas eu botei pra secar aquele dia, você lembra? Eu botei a sacola dela pra secar.
The experience gained from having a chance to put them on during the mission and not just before entry is invaluable to the crew. They will have, no one's put an oxsuit on in zero gravity before.
O resultado do exame foi que tá tudo bem, é isso? Mas aí você vai tomar algum medicamento, alguma fita?
In the middle of the mission it's going to pay them
qual que era o
dividends
problema?
for when they have to put it on entry day.
Era uma
When
dor,
there is
era uma
a
dor
little
aonde,
bit of a
assim?
time constraint because we
Coisa
need to
que-
ensure that
aí eu
they're
reclamei,
suited and
eles
seated
ficaram
before
fazendo
entry.
exames, aí fizeram-
resultado do exame foi que tá tudo bem, é isso?
Ontem
Miles.
passou do
Hi,
dedo.
Miles Doran,
Como é
CBS
sair
News.
daqui?
One question for Rick and
A
one for
sensação.
Debbie. Rick,
Isso é
how long
isolado.
before entry interface and roughly at what altitude, if you know it, are you
Mas
switching back
sentiu, né,
over
o
to
carro,
TIGRS and getting
só
GPS
isso.
back? How
Mas não é
quickly is
estranho?
that sequence of events
Deve ser
happening?
estranho até isso, tipo, você tá
And
fora da
Debbie,
casa e
after
depois voltar pra
Artemis
casa.
I, the main
Porque eu fui
parachutes in the
pro
forward
paredão
bay
falso, mas eu
cover
não saí
weren't
daqui.
able to be recovered for inspection. Is there anything you wish you knew about how they perform that you don't know based on other data that you were able to get? Thanks.
So as far as the handover from the Deep Space Network to TIGRS, that's going to occur approximately 38 minutes prior to entry interface. Once the handover is complete, you'll hear a comm check from Capcom to confirm we have a good link. And I just think this is a good time to acknowledge that the Deep Space Network has been performing exceptionally through the mission. It was a watch item as we were preparing for the mission over the past couple months, but the team that has been managing those systems and ensuring good communications has really performed tremendously, and their efforts pre-flight have paid dividends.
Yeah, I'd say on the parachute question, the Artemis I was one data point, and so we really don't, it's a demonstration of how the parachutes perform, but our certification is really based on extensive ground tests where we are, chunking parachute assets out the back of a plane in Yuma and looking at all different kind of corners of the box, and you have one chute out or two chutes out or one drogue and you miss a main, and so you're doing these tests on the ground to really prove out that system. So I'd say, not getting the asset back, that, you can always learn by visually inspecting it when it comes back, but that's not what we base our certification on. We are putting the parachutes for Artemis II on the, we would like to recover them and see if we get those back. But part of the reason of adding all the additional air assets that we spoke of earlier was to get some really good imagery of those chutes if we don't get them back.
Okay, we'll take one or two more, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. Go ahead.
Hi, Nick Notario with ABC 13. Question, Rick, for you. Give us the difficulty about what you're going to do relative to the launch, the lunar flyby. For people at home, how hard is this splashdown that you all are trying to accomplish? And what are the nerves like here at JSC to make sure that those astronauts return safely to Earth?
I don't know if it's necessarily harder. I think it's just a different environment. It's very dynamic, so similarly to the launch environment, there's not a lot of time to react. When we're performing the launch of any rocket, no matter who's doing who's in charge of the launch, there's not a lot of time to respond. And we've talked a little bit, and we showed the video
here at JSC
the
to
video
make sure that
of
those
the engineering
astronauts
team
return
and how
safely to Earth.
the operations teams and engineering teams have been working well together.
I don't know if it's necessarily
unfortunately,
harder. I
when
think
we're
it's
in
just
a
a
really
different environment,
time-critical,
it's very dynamic,
so
we don't have as much of an
similarly to the launch
opportunity
environment. There's not a lot of time
exchange
to react
information and talk through
when nuances of failure.
when we're
Performing the launch of any entry is more that there's more of a reliance on the operations teams as the experts to provide a recommendation and safely ensure that the astronauts return home.
I'll just mention that Debbie mentioned a little earlier about the probabilistic risk assessment. We don't talk a lot comparatively about the risk of one part of the mission relative to another, but obviously, launching the rocket in ascent is a significant part of the risk that we've retired and is behind us. But obviously, we're down to the wire now. We're down to the end of the mission, and obviously getting the crew back home and getting them landed safely is a significant part of the risk that's still in front of us. So.
Okay, we'll take one final question here, and then we'll go ahead and conclude.
Thanks for taking my question. I'm very sorry, it brings up the dreaded toilet again, but there was some conversation between the crew and control, I think it was yesterday, about the volume in the tank needing to keep on top of that ahead of re-entry. I was just wondering if you could give me some more information about what that concern might have been, or whether it even is a real concern. I take it from your previous answers, you're happy about the conditions for re-entry, but Why could that be an issue? And if it is an issue, has it been resolved?
Yeah, I think the issue that, if it's specific to reentry, is with that tank, it's not, we've been talking for the last few days, it's not venting as effectively as we had hoped or had planned. And so that tank may have more volume in it on reentry day than our initial models had analyzed. And so we're just looking at, with a tank of that volume, are we okay? And we're perfectly fine. So just double checking loads and things like that. And CG of the spacecraft, things are moved around and packed differently, so all that's part of that assessment we do right before reentry.
Okay, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank our participants for joining us today. We do have one time change coming up with the crew news conference scheduled for later this evening. That will occur approximately an hour later. Plan to start at 9:45 Central Time, 10:45 p.m. Eastern Time. You can stay tuned for all the latest updates, including imagery, at nasa.gov, and thank you for joining us.
Eu vivo com calor aqui, simplesmente tentamos entender. Sabe? Teste não é de coração, qualquer coisa é de coração.